I want to say a few words on the latest developments regarding Hong Kong. And there's been some significant statements by the Prime Minister and by Dominic Raab regarding the status of BNOs, British nationals overseas. Um, and it may actually represent the largest visa overhaul since the 1970s when the regime of Idi Amin in Uganda expelled thousands of Asians, people of South Asian descent. Now, at the time, it's worth pointing out that when the Heath government accepted those people coming into Britain, there was domestic controversy. This was in the wake of the Rivers of Blood speech. Nevertheless, history judged that Head Heath done the right thing with that because they integrated, they were successful people, hardworking, and it's been seen as one of the great success stories of immigration. Now, Hong Kongers, in a similar way, are seen as hardworking. They're seen as entrepreneurial. Um, I don't think we're going to see a mass influx of Hong Kongers. I don't think that's going to happen. However, the Chinese state has created this situation. China's contention is the West has interfered and the situation in Hong Kong has just been sabotaged by hooligans and rioters. Well, firstly, let me just make a contrast between what's going on with the George Floyd protests and what's going on in Hong Kong, because a lot of people will be tempted to make comparisons. Um, so, with the George Floyd situation, you have genuine and sincere anger at police brutality, and there are issues and talking points around racism. But most of the violence has been opportunistic thuggery. There's been some truly nasty things going on, people being attacked for absolutely nothing. I saw one video, I'm not sure where it was, but basically, this group of black people were randomly attacking any white person that came into the neighborhood just for the sake of it. Absolutely no purpose whatsoever. There was footage from the New York City subway where a black woman was attacked by black criminals. And the way I see it is if you are wearing a mask, if you are engaging in wanton vandalism, if you're attacking random people, you're a criminal. I don't care if you're black, white, Hispanic, or Asian. You behave like a thug, you are a thug. And there's been a lot of ugly things going on. Now, how does this differ from Hong Kong? Well, the overwhelming majority of the protests in Hong Kong started off as peaceful. About a year ago, up to 2 million people. And even if you think that's an exaggerate, okay, let's say 1.5 million. Whatever way you look at it, a huge demonstration against the encroaching authoritarianism of the Chinese state. The main motivation for those protests was against the extradition bill, which many Hong Kongers rightly feared would be used as a covert way for the Chinese state to target dissidents, ostensibly for the purpose of targeting criminals. And there was a murder case, a guy in Hong Kong who killed his girlfriend, and the Chinese state was using that as an example. But the reality is they were using it as a covert way to try and get at dissidents. And when you consider that Hong Kong booksellers were kidnapped, booksellers who had sold material critical of the Chinese Communist Party, then there is a real basis for that fear. Now, why does the situation differ? Well, it is true that there were aspects of the Hong Kong protest, particularly towards the end of 2019, that did not help the movement. I'm not going to lie about that. There were some Hong Kong protesters that were being stupid. They were engaging in wanton vandalism and violence. There's no escaping that fact. There was one example where a man accused of being pro-Beijing was set on fire. That was horrible. It was thuggish. It was wrong. But the Chinese state media only focused on the protests when they started to get violent. There was some speculation that the Chinese state was even stoking up some of that violence to try and smear the movement. I don't know either way if that's true or not. I wouldn't put it past the Chinese state, but I also concede that there may have been some elements of the protest that did, um, go about things the wrong way and just behaved like criminals. It was stupid, for example, when they were targeting other Hong Kong citizens just because they were deemed to be pro-China. That was stupid, and that didn't help the image of the protest. However, you have to consider that where, in the case of Minneapolis, Derek Chauvin's being arrested. He's now facing second-degree murder charges. The three other officers are facing charges themselves. Contrast that with Hong Kong, where there's been extensive claims of police brutality and significant evidence for it. Not a single Hong Kong police officer has been held to account for that by the Carrie Lam administration. She claims she's not a puppet of Beijing. Not a single Hong Kong officer has been held to account. Not one. You know, they were once the pride of Asia. They're now being seen as basically a thuggish wing of the Chinese Communist Party. Rightly or wrongly, that's how they're being seen. And Hong Kong will not move forward until some of the police are held to account. There's also been claims of the Hong Kong police turning a blind eye when violence has been directed against the anti-Beijing factions. For example, the attack at Yuandong metro station. It took 38 minutes for the police to arrive despite thousands of calls. This was an attack by suspected triads against protesters. It took 38 minutes for the police to arrive. Yet they were everywhere to be seen when the protesters were demonstrating. So that implies that they were turning a blind eye. It's difficult to prove outright collaboration, but you have to wonder. And you have to wonder, was the Chinese state behind those triads attacking the protesters? Why would they randomly attack the protesters? These are organized criminals. They're usually involved in drug trafficking and prostitution and that sort of thing. So why would they just randomly attack protesters? One has to wonder, is there powerful forces behind that? So this situation with Hong Kongers coming into the UK. In 1989, the Thatcher government was faced with this situation in the wake of the Tiananmen Square massacre, which demonstrators in Hong Kong are today marking. This was the week that happened 31 years ago, and despite their best efforts, the Carrie Lam government hasn't been able to silence this, um, although it hasn't been formally given the go-ahead for the first time ever, in fact. Why is it so important? You might think, well, time's going on, why does it matter so much? It matters because the Chinese state is doing its level best, pointing to the protests going on in the United States to try and attack democracy. Never, ever, ever forget that the Chinese state hides the events of 1989. You try looking this up in a Chinese textbook, you won't find it. You try typing in the Chinese internet, Tiananmen Square 1989, it will come up not found. So until the Chinese state is honest about its past, it is in no position whatsoever to be pointing fingers at the United States or any other Western country. America has serious problems, there's no question about that. And it is right that there is scrutiny, it's right there's debate, it's right that there's protests, peaceful protests. But China has zero moral high ground on this. None. I mean, my simple point would be if China has nothing to hide regarding 1989, then why don't they just come clean about it? Why don't they put it in the public domain? You know, if they feel they had to put down riots, why don't they just say that? That's my challenge to CGTN, Xinhua, to the Chinese state. What are you hiding? You know, if you acted out of necessity, if you acted to put down violent riots, as has been claimed, why the censorship? Why the censorship? Don't you trust the Chinese people to make their own mind up? And I put the same challenge to those Chinese nationalists who defend the Deng Xiaoping regime. If his regime acted out of necessity, why don't they just come clean about it? Why don't they say, look, this is what happened, we were putting down riots? But they haven't done that. They will not let this be in the public domain. That is a very important issue, and that is why it's so important that it's commemorated in Hong Kong and Taiwan increasingly. The Taiwanese government has called for Beijing to apologize for this. They never will because they're too arrogant to do that. They're too arrogant to ever admit their mistakes. Um, so this is not something that Boris Johnson and Dominic Raab are taking lightly, but it may well be that we are now looking at a situation similar to what happened in Uganda in the 70s. It's not exactly the same because obviously China is not expelling Hong Kongers, so it's not exactly the same situation. But These people genuinely, genuinely fear that they are gradually living under a dictatorship. I mean, as of a few weeks ago, one country, two systems is effectively dead in everything but name. It's that serious. It really is. Now, in 1989, the Thatcher government faced domestic opposition from Norman Tebbit because it went against a campaign promise to lower immigration. But the thing is, I honestly think most Britons would be okay with Hong Kongers coming here, even right-wing Britons. Um, and frankly, they would look at that in contrast to immigration from Islamic countries, where there is a real risk of Islamization. I'm going to be accused of being a right winger here, but the fact of the matter is, the average person who voted for Brexit, I believe, would be a lot more concerned about immigration from Islamic countries, from Muslims who may not integrate, versus Hong Kongers who are very, very pro-British. I mean, my goodness, these people have been waving British flags. And it's not that this is something they want to do lightly. They've lived their whole lives in Hong Kong. They don't exactly want to come to this rainy island. But that's what the situation is. I personally would welcome them with open arms because I believe they would integrate. I believe they would be very pro-British. And the fact of the matter is, China has violated one country, two systems, and it's violated the terms of the Sino-British Joint Declaration, which was supposed to respect Hong Kong autonomy until 2047. They've clearly failed to do that. And I believe that they have taken advantage of the unsavory aspects of the protests because there has, like I say, been some idiots who have, been engaging in vandalism and attacking the police. But you can't ignore the fact that the police have themselves been engaging in thuggish behaviour, including alleged sexual assault of female demonstrators. And there's been independent scrutiny showing that this may well be the case. So, really, the Hong Kong government can't play the victim when Carrie Lam's administration hasn't made any significant efforts to hold a single police officer to account. Not one. To me, that's a big problem. And that's why it differs from Minneapolis. There's a lot of legitimate debate to be had about what's happening in the United States, but the fact of the matter is, Derek Chauvin is now facing up to 25 years in prison. He's been charged with second-degree murder. There's a rigorous debate going on in the United States. Every major network's covering it. That contrasts to China, where CGTN and Xinhua, the only coverage they will show of the Hong Kong situation is to demonize the protesters as terrorists and hooligans because of the idiotic behavior of a few. The overwhelming majority have been peaceful. So people need to really wake up as to what's going on here. Personally, I would absolutely welcome Hong Kongers coming to this country. If they're pro-British, obviously. But I believe most of them are, and I believe they would integrate. I remember when I was in Edinburgh 6 years ago on referendum day, Scottish referendum day, a friend of mine whom I took a English teaching course with some 11 years ago now. Um, he's a British Hong Konger. He grew up in Edinburgh. He's a proud Scot. He's a proud Briton. He's a good example of the sort of people we're talking about. I met a group of young Hong Kongers in Newcastle. They weren't thugs. They weren't criminals. They were intelligent young people who had strong feelings on the issues involved. And there's a world of difference between that and the sort of things that are now going on in the United States. Just criminals just randomly vandalizing things and setting things on fire. Even violence in Hong Kong, whilst I don't condone it, has been focused. So it's been focused at government buildings, it's been focused at the police. I don't condone it. I think it's stupid because I think it plays into Chinese state hands. And, I'm not going to condone people attacking fellow Hong Kongers just because they're pro-China. That's wrong. You can't condone that. And yes, a minority of the protesters have been doing that. But the Chinese state is trying to say that they're all terrorists, they're all rioters. And that's what's so fundamentally dishonest about what the Chinese state's doing. And it's yet another reason, in my opinion, to kick out CGTN. In fact, Ofcom has finally taken some action and reprimanded CGTN for its biased coverage on Hong Kong. I think they should go further. I don't think CGTN deserves a license in this country. given that they have aired forced confessions. But this is a time we really need to be showing backbone. And I will give Johnson and Raab credit because they have finally shown that they're prepared to stand up to China with this move. Um, and I think we need to go further. I think we need to scrap the Huawei contract. And I think we need to be a lot more vocal about the things that China is doing. I don't say that lightly. I really don't say that lightly. A big part of my life has been around China and the Chinese. I have Chinese friends, but I cannot in good conscience ignore what is going on in Hong Kong. I just can't. And we do have an obligation, as the Johnson administration has acknowledged. We have an obligation to help these people. They have been betrayed by the Chinese state, which has disregarded one country, two systems. So now we've no choice but to intervene by giving visas to these BNO British overseas British nationals overseas. There is an argument, in fact, to be made to extend that to other Hong Kongers born after 1997. That's the situation. China won't like it. China will kick up protests. Of course, one complicated aspect of this is, will China let them just leave? That is a major sticking point. I think if Beijing tries to block them from leaving, then we really, really need to raise the tempo, even to the point of expelling the Chinese ambassador. I don't want to see that happen, but it may come to that.